Dust rolls across the Tunisian plain. Its Africa Corps advances cautiously through the ruins of an abandoned Allied supply area near Kasserine Pass. Their boots crunch on broken ration tins and spilled coffee beans. Silence follows each step, the wealth of America, laid bare in the desert. It was here that the Wehrmacht truly saw what industrial abundance meant. By the winter of 1943, the war in North Africa had reached a brutal turning point. The German Africa Corps, once sweeping across Libya in triumph, was now cornered between the advancing British Eighth Army from the east and the newly arrived American and French forces from the west. The vast Sahara, with its merciless sun and endless supply lines, had become the stage for one of the most logistically complex campaigns of the Second World War. When the United States entered the conflict in December 1941, it possessed immense industrial potential but little battlefield experience. Its soldiers were sent to North Africa as part of Operation Torch in November 1942. The landings along the coasts of Morocco and Algeria marked the first American ground involvement against Nazi Germany. What followed was a race to seize Tunisia before the Axis could fortify it. For the Germans, this was Rommel Desert Fox, where Allied aircraft and submarines hunted Axis convoys relentlessly. By early 1943, WWII ate sand with our stew. We thought it was seasoning, an oceanic bridge of ships, depots, and quartermaster units designed to keep modern armies fed and fueled. For every U.S. soldier fighting in the desert, dozens more labored to unload ships, stack supplies, and move them across thousands of miles of barren terrain. Their rations, while simple, reflected industrial abundance. The standard American contained canned meat, biscuits, coffee, sugar, and chocolate, were created to endure desert heat. Cigarettes, instant coffee, even chewing gum appeared in their packs. To German soldiers, whose daily rations by 1943 resembled survival kits, these were unimaginable luxuries. But the Americans were also learning neat rows of food, ammunition, and fuel-weary soldiers. The scenes they discovered after the fighting were astonishing. These depots told a story deeper than any victory or defeat. They revealed the raw power of industrial warfare, how one nation could feed its armies as if they were still at home, while another fought on starvation rations. The contrast would become one of the defining lessons of Kasserine Pass, equally important, balancing calories, portability, and morale. From assembly lines in Chicago to ports in Norfolk, shipments of rations were sealed, labeled, and sent by convoy to North Africa. The American soldier far beyond what his German counterpart received. It was these became symbols of comfort, reminders of home. They were tangible proof that the U.S. could project its lifestyle halfway around the world. Meanwhile, Axis supply routes were collapsing. The Allies had achieved air superiority over the Mediterranean. German and Italian convoys leaving Naples or Palermo were routinely bombed or sunk. Every ton of cargo that reached Tunisia was a triumph. S-tanks often ran out of fuel midway through offensives. His troops scavenged wrecks for spare parts and rations. By the time they reached the American lines, many had not eaten properly in days. When the German advance surged through Kasserine Pass on February 19, 1943, their objective was tactical U.S. Army. The Americans live like kings, even in the desert. Their garbage would feed our regiment for a week. One who could afford to lose a depot and still fight on the next day as if nothing had happened. The Africa Corps, in contrast, was fighting on borrowed time, dependent on dwindling shipments from Europe and local scavenging. The discovery also offered a rare moment of relief. For days afterward, German soldiers feasted on captured rations. They brewed coffee for the first time in months, smoked American cigarettes, and shared tins of meat and fruit. For a brief moment, the war's officers saw a deeper truth. Logistics would decide the outcome of the North African campaign. Not bravery alone. Kasserine Pass was a tactical success for the Axis SC. Temporary triumph could not overcome the industrial tide building behind the Allied war effort. The scene of Germans standing inside that American depot became a quiet symbol of the war, the industrial might of a nation that could feed its armies as endlessly as it could arm them. For the soldiers of the Afrika Korps, war in North Africa was a daily negotiation with hunger. The desert was a merciless battlefield, eiserne Portionen, not comfort. Soldiers boiled water tainted with sand, sharing meager spoonfuls under tank shadows. One veteran later recalled, "Tea come. We ate whatever the Italians left behind. Just food they saw, and hunger blinked first." On paper, Kasserine Pass was a skirmish. In reality, it became a lesson in military logistics. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg in 1940 and his sweeping maneuvers across Libya had relied on daring, not depth. Yet North Africa exposed the limits of that philosophy. By 1943, the Afrika Korps could barely sustain movement. Tanks that once struck deep into enemy lines now halted for lack of fuel. Trucks sat idle, their tires shredded, engines cannibalized for parts. Each kilometer gained demanded more petrol than the Axis could deliver. The Americans, on the other hand, could lose depots and still operate at full efficiency. When the Germans overran the American supply area near Kasserine, they saw not only food tanks and fed its men, but tactically, it changed nothing. Rommel understood it immediately. He reportedly told one of his aides, "Not men, but factories." His true weapon was logistics, and not only German. American forces in Tunisia were young, confident, and untested. Their commanders, like General Lloyd Fredendall of II Corps, had never fought an army as skilled as Rommel, one of the few times the Wehrmacht would outmaneuver the Americans in open desert warfare. Yet, even in victory, Rommel saw the seeds of defeat. His success at Kasserine gained ground, but not power. His forces were exhausted, his supplies nearly gone. When his men stumbled upon the American depots, it was as if fate had allowed them to see what they could never have as strength. Fredendall would later be removed from command, replaced by General George S. Patton, whose arrival transformed the American army into a hardened, aggressive force. The lesson of Kasserine reshaped U.S. command philosophy for the rest of the war. The leadership contrast was clear. Rommel's system could win wars. The Wehrmacht, troops who entered that American depot in Tunisia, were not just staring at food, not just bravery and a war of endurance for the men of the U.S. Army. Quartermaster Corps. North Africa was their testing ground. They won no medals, no battlefield glory. Yet their contribution was the backbone of the campaign. They managed supply routes stretching from the ports of Oran and Algiers to the distant front lines in Tunisia, through mountains and deserts, over roads that often vanished into sandstorms. Their task was monumental: to feed and equip an army of hundreds of thousands scattered across 3 nations. Warehouses filled with rations, fuel, and spare parts sprang up overnight, each guarded by soldiers who often had no idea how close the enemy was. At Kasserine, many of these depots were hastily evacuated or abandoned as German armored spearheads advanced faster than expected. For those quartermasters who later returned, the sight of looted stores was both humiliating and instructive. They realized that logistics was about security, foresight, and adaptability. The U.S. Army learned quickly. Within weeks, supply depots were relocated deeper inland, reinforced, and better protected. The Quartermaster Corps adjusted its philosophy. Never again would supply lines be treated as afterthoughts. They became part of the battle plan itself. In later campaigns, the American logistics network would operate like a living organism, flexible and responsive. The Germans may have enjoyed their captured feast at Kasserine, but the Americans learned something far more valuable: how to feed a global army under fire. There was an unspoken psychological war being waged in North Africa. They eat like in peacetime. They live in comfort, even where we die of thirst. They were recognition of inevitability. For the Americans, morale worked in the opposite direction. Despite defeat at Kasserine, they now understood what they possessed in knowing that, tomorrow, there would still be food, fuel, and ammunition. When the German soldiers left that depot, full for the first time in months, they were also quietly aware no army starving in the desert could defeat an empire of plenty. That moral imbalance was as decisive as any tank or gun. February 20th, 1943, dawn breaks over the jagged ridges of Kasserine Pass. The desert air is crisp, tinged with the metallic scent of spent ammunition and burning fuel. The Wehrmacht. The American positions are scattered, and supply depots lie ahead. As the first units reach the outskirts of a small Allied supply area, the scene seems almost surreal. The depot, hastily abandoned in the chaos of retreat, is intact. Trucks stand parked as if the drivers had simply vanished. Wooden crates bear the unmistakable markings: Quartermaster Corbs, Spam, corned beef, and even tinned poultry. Brief, human, and disbelieving. For a few hours, the war this bounty cannot change the strategic reality. Fuel is still limited. Ammunition dwindles. The Americans, even if temporarily routed, possess an industrial capacity beyond imagination. Yet, he allows his men to enjoy the spoils. Meanwhile, the soldiers begin cataloging what they can carry. Every can of food, every chocolate bar, even boxes of instant coffee are stuffed into backpacks, tank compartments, and trucks. It is a logistical goldmine, yet fleeting. The desert heat will spoil what cannot be consumed quickly, and the advance cannot pause to carry every tin. Even as they feast, there is a shadow. The Americans are not defeated. This depot is a temporary lapse, not a collapse. Rommel, joy and despair, abundance and scarcity, temporary victory and looming defeat. As noon approaches, the Germans begin to withdraw, taking only what is practical. The depot, vast and full, will soon be reclaimed by the Americans. Yet the images will remain in the minds of those who saw them. They carry a lesson about the power of industry, the weight of logistics, and the psychological force of abundance in war. This moment is more than a raid. It is a turning point in perception. The Wehrmacht may win battles, but a nation that can feed its armies with such ease wields a quiet, inevitable power. By mid-afternoon, the full implications of the depot begin to sink in for the Afrika Korps. Rommel's desert offers no sanctuary for prolonged resupply. The soldiers methodically load what they can carry. Cans of meat are stacked in half-tracks, biscuits jammed into backpacks, coffee tins crammed into armored vehicles. But every choice is calculated. The physical manifestation of America's arrival is imminent, and his aggressive, disciplined command style will transform U.S. forces in Tunisia. The depot raid, though tactically satisfying, becomes a stark reminder. Victory in desert skirmishes does not equal strategic success. The captured rations, once a symbol of triumph, now highlight the disparity in industrial power. One veteran of the Afrika Korps later wrote, "The psychological effect is profound. Men who had been sustained by desperation now confront a reality in which the enemy, a snapshot of the industrial war, the Germans are slowly losing." The desert wind sweeps over the crates, now shadowed, whispering a lesson the Afrika Korps cannot ignore. The future of warfare belongs not only to strategy and courage, but to production, supply, and the relentless capability to sustain armies across continents. The moment closes with quiet reflection. German soldiers, exhausted and full, lie near their vehicles, staring at the stars. They have witnessed abundance beyond their imagination, but they know the war is not yet decided. The depot was a prize, Yes, a fleeting oasis in a desert of deprivation. Yet these gains were tactical, not strategic. The U.S. II Corps, despite the initial rout, began reorganizing under new leadership. General George S. Patton arrived in late February, bringing discipline, aggressive tactics, and an insistence on training and preparation. Patton's forces remained undersupplied, stretched thin across Tunisia. For a few hours we felt alive again, eating chocolate and bread. But we knew the Americans could make more than we could ever take. His forces were still overstretched, his tanks low on fuel, and his infantry fatigued from continuous operations. Meanwhile, the Americans, under Patton and reinforcements from the British First Army, were reorganizing and modernizing their tactics. The depot itself, though captured and looted briefly, was quickly replaced. The U.S. Army a temporary advantage that exposed the limits of operational daring when not backed by sustainable logistics. Morale, however, remained a powerful after-effect. For the German soldiers, the depot lingered in memory as both a blessing and a reminder of what they could never replicate. It was a surreal moment of indulgence in the midst of relentless desert hardship. Officers later reflected that while the troops had feasted, they had also glimpsed the scale of America, a psychological revelation that weighed on every soldier aware of the disparity. For the Americans, the event reinforced the importance of supply as a strategic asset. Commanders emphasized that battlefield success depended not only on manpower and firepower, but on the secure, continuous flow of provisions. The lessons from Kasserine were applied in subsequent campaigns across Sicily and Italy, shaping a logistical doctrine that allowed the Allies to sustain multiple fronts simultaneously. Ultimately, the depot incident illustrated a profound imbalance. Germany could fight skillfully and seize temporary advantages, but it could not match the Allied capacity for production, replenishment, and mobility. The capture of the American supplies, while momentarily exhilarating for Rommel that victories are temporary, and the true measure of an army lies in its capacity to endure, resupply, and adapt. Kasserine Pass and the depot within it became an object lesson in the industrial and psychological dimensions of modern conflict, shaping both Allied confidence and Axis anxiety for the remainder of the North African campaign. The German soldiers left the depot behind, full yet aware of their limitations. The Americans would reclaim it, reinforce it, and move forward. And the desert, silent once more, held the echoes of a brief, surreal encounter with abundance that neither side would forget. The image of German soldiers standing amid crates of American rations in the desert remains one of the quiet, profound moments of World War II. It was not a battle won or lost, nor a heroic charge or tactical maneuver, but a lesson in the invisible forces that shape wars: logistics, industry, and endurance. In that depot, the Africa Corps glimpsed the scale of America, a capability far beyond their own. Chocolate, coffee, bread, and cigarettes were not mere indulgences. They were symbols of a nation capable of sustaining its armies across oceans, deserts, and continents. The men who ate, laughed, and marveled did so in temporary relief. Yet the psychological weight of that abundance lingered far longer than the taste of sugar or coffee. For the Allies, the incident reinforced a fundamental truth. Victory in modern war depends as much on supply lines as on courage, strategy, or firepower. The Americans would refine their logistical networks, protect their depots, and ensure that soldiers in every theater of war could rely on steady, predictable rations. The war was not only fought with guns and tanks, but with factories, transport convoys, and warehouses. For the Germans, the depot was a stark reminder of limitation. Even brilliant commanders and disciplined troops could not overcome scarcity indefinitely. Hunger, fatigue, and supply shortages were silent enemies, often more decisive than the bullets and shells of the battlefield. The depot exposed the gulf between temporary success and strategic inevitability, a power that would, in the end, help determine the outcome of the Second World War.